and welcome everyone to today's call with author Jason Fox. It was December 31st, 1985, when tragedy struck and Rick Nelson's plane dropped from the sky, killing the celebrity and causing heartbreak to absolutely millions of fans worldwide. In his new book, Ricky Nelson Uncovered, How I Learned the Truth About His Final Days, author Jason Fox brings about a perspective that I don't think people have contemplated before. It's super interesting, and I am so glad to have you here today. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Adrienne. Great to be with you.
So your book is based on almost 2 decades of working on a project about Ricky Nelson. So can we go back to the very beginning? You know, what got you interested in him? How did you get involved? Where did this whole story start?
Well, it's very interesting, Adrienne. It was a chance meeting that I had with Rick's final manager and producer. I was working in a retail bank at the time, and as I said, it was just a purely chance meeting, running into him, and he was very dynamic, very flamboyant, very eager to tell his story of what he was doing at the time, and he was working on a project of his own to give some insight as to what he was doing with Rick right up to Rick's death. And one thing led to another, and it just was a friendship that started and very organic, starting to help him here and there with little things, and that really turned into a role that I was filling for him, helping him with his project.
Wow. Okay. So what was this original project that you guys were working on?
So what it was a book that had really turned into a movie project, and it was his my ex-partner, Rick's final producer, that had originally written this. And when I met him, he was already in process with that. He was doing it himself. He was a personality that had come from the Hollywood scene from the time that he was, I believe, 19. So it was a very flailing, sort of floundering, heartfelt project for him to try to get the word out about what was going on between him and Rick during Rick's last couple of years. And so he was trying to get that word out, and kind of, you know, having some success, kind of dilly-dallying around, couldn't really get it done. He was doing it himself, and, you know, just my skill set, I suppose. We came from the same area. We went to high schools right next to each other, even though we had a decent age gap. We had a lot in common, so we hit it off quite well. And I really was able to help him take his project to the next level, and give him the organizational and the support systems that he really needed. And as I said, it was purely organic. There was not one day where I woke up and said, hey, this is what I want to do today. I was working my full-time jobs the entire time. I was working and helping him with that project. So it was really, you know, it went all the way from just book to screenplay to movie of the week to, you know, contracts with studios and feature films. So it was a very long, arduous process that ultimately obviously did not happen. But nevertheless, the process was very interesting, to say the least.
So was this your first time as a Hollywood producer? Like, you went from banking?
I had nothing
banking
to do.
Is great. Well, Hollywood producers need bankers. Okay, this is
that's correct.
Key piece of understanding. We need bankers. We need people who understand money and contracts and I-dotting and T-crossing, because what it sounds like is you hooked up with a creative person who had vision, and you had the stick-to-itiveness and the get-things-doneness that often is missing and why projects don't get going. But this project didn't end up happening. But throughout all of these different renditions, and I've seen some of the backstory in this, when you're talking about putting together a movie, what was the movie about? You know, was it just
the movie was really
was it just a music video, or, you know, tell me more about the movie.
No, the movie was really bringing to light information that was not in the public domain. It was information that was privy to his to my ex-partner through his own personal experiences. Who he obviously, I relived all of that with him, going through the process of helping him write the the book and get the movie screenplay done. So his was about bringing those facts or those details, in his view, to light, to market, really kind of an untold story and a non-public domain take on what was happening to Rick on a day-to-day basis, all the way up to the day he died. Unfortunately, it was information about the backstory on the management, on his traveling schedule, his personal story between his children and his ex-wife and his new fiance. Very dynamic workings on a day-to-day basis of what they were trying to do relative to a commercial comeback. All the while he was still performing and still having to pay the bills and all of that. So it's really a behind the scenes, sort of behind the gates. He had purchased the old Errol Flynn mansion, so you've heard stories about that house and all the craziness that goes up there on Torreyson where that house was, and all of that was still all going on. Behind the gates, behind the scenes, sort of untold stories and sagas of Rick's day-to-day life, and really what he was trying to do moving into 1986, and really the plans that he was going to undertake that unfortunately didn't happen.
Now, one thing I noticed is that you refer to him as Rick, and you always have, throughout the time that I've spoken with you, referred to him as Rick. And I have only ever known him as Ricky Nelson. Like, that's who I think of.
Right.
My mom had his poster on her wall growing up, devastated when he died, just like millions of other people. And everybody thought of him as Ricky, but he was in the middle of a transformation himself, of a reinvention, trying to go from child star Ricky to Rick, the adult. Talk to me about that reinvention.
That reinvention was very interesting, and I don't know that, folks, they probably got a taste of it while he was touring, but I don't know that they really understood the drive that Rick had while he was doing it and going through it. And I refer to him as Rick because the entire time that I was working on this whole process for the last 19 years, the whole focus was that Rick Nelson was trying to drop the Ricky Nelson persona. There was even a story that, with one of the concert T-shirts in one of the LA venues, there were T-shirts that were sold at the concession stands, and Rick himself had, taken a Sharpie to the Ricky, the Y and the Ricky, and, X'd it out, and they were all wearing it backstage before the show, and sort of in protest to the management and the folks that were kind of running the scenes from a business standpoint, to really shed the Ricky persona and bring out the Rick image, which he was trying to do. He was recording a new album. He was making and forging this comeback that was very popular in the mid '80s. You probably remember the likes of Tina Turner, Don Henley. David Bowie was doing it. The Rolling Stones, who haven't stopped, were still going and coming out with new albums at the time when they even thought were aged. So it was a theme that was going on at the time, and Rick was a part of it. He was just a part of it behind the scenes, and people I don't think realized how deep it was for him. And so that there's all of that aspect of Ricky becoming Rick, getting rid of the Ricky Nelson, traveling man, Ozzie and Harriet days, and moving into, at the time he died, he was 45. So here's a middle-aged man, singing sort of teeny bopper songs that, Ricky Nelson, the original teen idol, sang. That's a difficult thing for somebody in their mid-40s to just constantly get up there and do a dog and pony show and regurgitate all the same things that made you popular or brought you onto the scene, 25, 30 years prior. That's a real hard thing for an artist and a creative person to do consistently. If you're still in the creative process, there's obviously touring bands that do that and have a great life and live on their past, but that wasn't Rick.
And that's what's interesting to me. So, I look at Madonna, and you and I are close in age, and Madonna, from the very first time that she started, every album, she had a new persona. So just like you have new fashion every fall season, she had a new persona, a new look, a new sound, a new something every single album. So we've come to expect that she'll do something different every time. So it's easy for her to consistently and constantly reinvent herself. But for child stars, like I look at Miley Cyrus and I think, if Rick Nelson could have stripped down and rode a wrecking ball and crushed his childhood stardom in order to pave the way for his future, I'm wondering if he would have, because that just wasn't done back then. And now we see this where, we have these child stars and they have to do something dramatic and drastic in order to shed that goody-goody, Disney star image. And that's got to be hard, in his 40s. Was he 40s or 50s? His 50s. Was he 50s? How old is he?
Yeah, in the 50s.
Yeah,
No, he was, so he was 45 when he passed. And you're right. You hit the nail on the head. I think it's funny that you brought up Madonna because look at the time frame. I don't think it's an accident that in the mid-'80s, I mean, it was New Year's Eve, 85, when Rick's plane crash happened. That was, the mid-'80s was that time of, I suppose, sort of reinvention in the music world. Prior to that, when Ricky was starting and was putting out those albums and Elvis was there and Beatles, how did people get their music or get their entertainment? They went to a record store and they bought a 45 and they put it on the record player. Mm-hmm. Miley Cyrus now has to deal with social media and, what was cool, 15 minutes ago. Not, did you hear, the number one song on the radio on the top 40, Casey Kasem style, back when those things were a little bit more popular. So it was a completely different environment that he had to deal with. And so, I think it's interesting you brought up those two people because that reinvention process is something that was difficult, I think, to attain, but he felt obviously in his heart of hearts that's how he had to survive, and that's exactly what was happening for 1986, and unfortunately we didn't get to see it.
Yeah, I think that his album was released, as far as it got anyway, eventually. But going back to the movie, there was interesting things that were brought up that I think anyone who's interested in filmmaking, and I'm an award-winning film producer, so I get this at a much more visceral level than most, but especially for anyone newly coming into the industry, like you were brand new. So talk to me about, how do you deal, I want to talk about the due diligence, because there were some things that were done, with hindsight that were like, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. And because I think there was quite a bit of money lost. So let's talk about, what that process looks like. Anybody who's coming into it, what were some of the warning signs that you were blind to because this was your first project that now in hindsight you're like, okay, maybe next time I won't do this?
Well, I think number one, you're exactly right, by the way, and just as you're talking about that and asking me that question, I'm literally reliving some of the meetings that we had and, the years overlapping and just what I went through. And I think in hindsight, we had a sort of a vision, and I did, at least I know I did, that, you kind of at all costs, this project is going to get done. And no matter what casualties you experience or how much it costs or what you have to do to get to it, it's got to get out, and it's got to get out as fast as possible. And there was that exclusive rights issue and exclusivity that we had with the project that was sort of driving that. And not to be over dramatic here, but I personally really felt, and I think you asked and touched on before why I stuck with it for so long. I personally felt that his ex-producer, my ex-partner, we're literally the only two people on the planet that could tell that story on behalf of Rick. The family couldn't because of this legal situation that they were chose to stay out of. So I really felt like plant your feet. I'm carrying the flag for Rick, and that's really, it was kind of like put the shields up and just go. And in hindsight, you'd probably step back and say, okay, we need to figure out what the path really looks like. We need to account for that. We need to plan for it. We need to set a budget, and we need to do all these other things. At the time, I was doing quite well in the mortgage business, And it was kind of easy for me to just say, okay, great, here's 80% of my income. Let's put that towards the project and let's just make it happen, because it always felt like it was our success was right around the corner. And it was, again, I used the word organic earlier. That project that he was working on and was his basically was a very organically grown process. It went from one incarnation to the next, partly because as we discovered things and discovered, openings in the process in the entertainment business, opportunities, different ways to do things. Literally, what was the difference between a movie of the week and the rights and the distribution that took versus, exploring, negative pickups with distribution for yourself and just all these different things. It was like a crash course in just what do the terms mean? I'm a mortgage guy and a banker. So it was very much a, kind of eyes wide open in a dark room with the lights off. My blindfold wasn't quite on; it was maybe around my neck, but it was very difficult to try to navigate through that. So in hindsight, the issue is, probably step back a little bit, do some planning, do some research, figure out what you're really getting yourself into, and then try to execute it in a more timely, budgetary fashion. But that's not what we were doing. It was, pedal to the metal, 100 miles an hour. You're taking all opportunities, and you're really kind of, you're somewhat spending haphazardly, indirectly. We were very, very conscious of money because it was being self-funded. So it's funny that, you try to be penny pinching minded or trying to do things, you end up spending more money doing that, in the long run. And I think that's what we went into.
I agree, having self-funded many of my own projects. Now, you bring up two things that I want to go back to. One was, and I do completely understand this project will get done no matter what, period, because I have several of those. And, and I am like, pedal to the metal. I
get done.
Totally get that. You've got to get it done. And, and it's interesting when you have to bootstrap it, too, because then it's like, well, it's going to get done, and I have WD-40 duct tape and 45 cents, and I'm going to do it anyway. And that was my first film. I mean, we made a 16-millimeter black and white feature film for $8,000 that went around the world twice for 2 years and won awards at film festivals all around the world. And so we shot it for $8,000, and that was the budget that was there when I came in. And then I ended up putting like another $80,000 in it at the end.
Oh man!
Self-funding it. Well,
I know that feeling.
Post-production, it was like another $12,000 for the post-production, which was no big deal. But it was the touring for 2 years. It was the travel cost. It was the marketing cost. It was the DVD productions. It was the digital telecine of the 16-millimeter film so we could turn it into a DVD. It was all that kind of stuff, right, which thankfully is a lot less expensive nowadays. But I get that this project will happen and that passion. And then you said a couple of things. One, you talked about exclusivity. So what was that exclusivity that you had that was so marketable that you had to hold on to, and was there a time limit on it?
Regarding time limit, specifically, I'm not sure if you're asking a legal time limit or a time limit on. We felt that there was some urgency with just getting Rick's story out, just because it was, so many years past his death, and we thought how relevant is the story itself. I think Rick obviously has his place in history, being a member, first inductees class of the Hall of Fame and all of that. I think he definitely has his place in history. At the time, we felt like remember, none of these biopics had come out yet. Ray wasn't out. Selena was, I think, just coming out or had been out yet. So that wasn't a normal thing. We were kind of cutting edge before all these projects were being done. So there was very much an urgency to what we were trying to do from that standpoint regarding timing. Regarding the exclusivity, that there's some details that I allude to in the book regarding the management and regarding the pilots and the NTSB report and these evidentiary details that are in the report. And there was also an aspect of my ex-partner's interaction with the management and with the group behind the scenes. And there was there is this very untold story about what was happening and what the inner workings were like within the Rick Nelson camp, if you will. The financial, processes, after his death, a lot of people I think may not understand or not know that there was a phony will that was filed. So there's all of this information that is basically non-public domain that is the experience of my ex-partner that he was originally bringing to light. And so that's really what it was about. It was all of these details that are really, haven't been out there.
I find that so fascinating. I know originally that you had an endorsement letter from the family and that Gunnar was 100% supporting the project, and then recently withdrew that support. And then you just mentioned about I think you said gag order, or they chose not to, or some legal something. Can you talk to me about, what is going on? There just seems to be kind of a blanket of obscurity over pieces of this story where nobody's going deeper. Nobody's pulling the blanket up. Nobody's looking under it. I did read the NTSB report, and I did look at that fake will that was filed, which gave the manager 20% of the estate. The manager who was about to be let go based on Ricky's transformation into Rick, as well as the conflicting reports from the pilots and how I have airplanes, so I'm very familiar with NTSB. Yeah. I'm familiar with how planes operate. I'm familiar with oxygen systems and all of these things. So, when I read it, the first thing I said was, that looks like sabotage to me. Why was that not investigated? What is or was going on with the whole, quieting of any potential investigation or controversy?
Well, I think that there was definitely controversy with there was almost a scramble, if you will, after Rick's death to, get things filed at the court. It's public record, but, all 4 children filed at the court. The manager did also, and then the subsequent phony will was filed a couple months after that. And they're basically, my understanding from my ex-partner is that there was this mutual gag order that was in place that basically the management and the family couldn't really go back and forth and publicly discuss anything. And therefore you had quiet. You had silence. There was nobody out there championing Rick as an individual or as an entity, as a public persona. There was no, for God's sakes, Elvis Presley died. I hate to say it, he died in a toilet, with who knows what was going on. And, look at Elvis Presley Enterprises, multi-billion-dollar company. And, Elvis is just as popular as he was when he was alive, and certainly more wealthy, arguably. And Rick didn't have any of that. So when you look at that, you go, well, scratch my head and say, why? And it goes to that legal issue between the management and the family. And you brought up Gunner's endorsement letter. We absolutely had a letter from Gunner in 1998 when that happened. And the letter is raving about my ex-partner's ability to tell his story. The fact that, one line in the letter is, he's the only true authority that was around their father at the time, even more so than them, and they lived with him. Legal blessings were given, the whole thing. It was basically we were being the voice for them when they couldn't be the voice themselves. And so we were telling that the background of that, of those stories. And yeah, you're right. There's definitely some cloud around the NTSB report. There's enough circumstantial evidence, and you start scratching your head, and you go, well, this is what the NTSB report says, and there's contradictory statements, and the testimony of why didn't they try to get the folks out or unlock the doors, or the fire started and nobody really knows why. And
well, I want to know why the door was locked.
How it started.
Why was the pilot cabin door locked from the inside in the first place? Because they couldn't get out.
Exactly.
So why?
Right. That's one of the questions.
So So there's all these. I mean, who with the private plane? We're not worried about Al Qaeda here, right? There was no Al Qaeda back then. So
right.
Why was the door locked? And it was locked. It wasn't just jammed. The door was locked. So like all these little pieces. I feel like I've watched too much Columbo or too much Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
But
right.
I manifest a conspiracy theory. Looking at all of these pieces of data, and I have no data to quelch those suspicions. So I have suspicions. Anyone who wants to read this, you have to read this book. It is remarkably well done, and there is, it opens with a fiction piece, which is a narrative about, based on a bunch of different information put together. This is what we presume, hallucinate happened, and it really reads like that fits all of the facts and all of the pieces of information that we have, and it fits all together. So, aside from that something was sabotaged, that's not indicated. You had some legal issues that kept things out of this book. I know that your lawyer is super, super conservative, and so there's a lot of things you couldn't say in the book that you, I guess, you're allowed to say in person, but you could not put them in the book due to potential copyright infringement, or you wanted to protect everyone's legal rights. And so that was super, super important in the book. So there's some things that you had to leave out. Do you want to talk about, some of those things that you wish you could have put in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things that I certainly can talk about, I'll touch on something in a minute, but one of the things that is in the book is that there are excerpts from the NTSB report. And I think, you mentioned Columbo and some of those shows, and I think of forensic files. You're given enough forensic data or circumstantial data, and yet then a conclusion isn't really drawn. You're sort of left with putting your hands up in the air and saying, well, how did this happen? So that's why, I put specific information and pieces of the NTSB report in this book to help support at least the scratching of the head and the viewpoints, and some of the things that I had to leave out. Again, for legal purposes, you hate to say it, but sometimes stories are told differently just because of legal cautionary steps that need to be taken. But from an interview standpoint, there's definitely the perception from Rick's camp that the manager was adversarial. There was definitely an issue with how much he traveled, the condition of the plane, the power struggle. You have to realize that Rick didn't have control of his own money. There's all these situations, pictures, and documents and everything that I have that I purposely did not put in the book just for legal purposes, but I still have all those things. I mean, I suppose I can, flash them in front of a camera in an interview to say that I have them, but, all these things that build up to this story, questions like, why is the manager driving and has a new Mercedes and a new Ferrari, and Rick has his old, 1974 Pantera? Questions like that. Why is the manager buying multiple houses and Rick lives in a... Right.
Yeah,
I had that question too.
What do you mean Rick didn't control his own money? What do you mean about that?
Well, there was a power of attorney that was in place that was one of the main reasons why the manager, or I guess Rick had gravitated to this manager, was kind of oversold. I mean, I guess he had done some basic stuff in the entertainment business, but basically the guy was a salesman, a trade salesman, and in essence, he idolized Colonel Tom Parker, and he kind of modeled a managerial style after Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, which there's all sorts of documentation out there and stories and, common knowledge that Colonel Tom Parker was almost a tyrant, with Elvis. And that's kind of very similar. That was
needed that.
Rick's manager.
Let's be
right. Elvis needed that. I think
Elvis,
and to be fair, Rick didn't necessarily need it, but pardon?
He needed that.
Yeah, right, exactly. He sure did. Rick didn't necessarily need it, but at the time, there was divorce situation going on between him and his ex-wife, and so Rick got into this power of attorney issue where he didn't have any control over his own finances. So I mean, not even being able to control, what money you spend for anything, for travel, for personal, for groceries, for God's sakes. I mean, the management had the purse strings, and so that's obviously something that was a trait in their relationship. Was Rick didn't really have a whole lot of control over what he did. It was the manager was really controlling the amount of times that Rick toured, the dedication, all of that, because that basically that money and that income was really controlled by the management, and it was really unfortunate. So when you go back to all these other circumstantial things about what's this information that's out there, there was also a breakdown that happened. This is not in the book, but there was a breakdown between the manager and my ex-partner, one-on-one, person-to-person, where they talk about a fight being on the plane, and between one of the pilots and the band members, and and then that fight tumbling into the heater and all this kind of stuff, and the area around the heater that possibly caused the fire and ignited it. The hull of that year of DC-3 was made of magnesium, very flammable metal. So it didn't take a whole lot for that thing to get engulfed. That's really a big, huge bombshell that has not been out there, is this supposed fight, on the plane, and that's one of the main points that just nobody's aware of. Other details that are in the report that are contradictory about the testimony between the pilots, completely different stories about how everything happened. Of course, everybody's got two perspectives, but there's testimony about one of the pilots telling the other pilot, don't tell them about the heater, specifically when they were on the outside of the plane with burns themselves. I mean, certainly they were injured during the crash and after the events, but that's a very telling quote. Don't tell them about the heater. Don't tell who about the heater. Don't tell the cops. Don't tell the NTSB. What happened about the heater? Why not tell them? So I think that's where you get the contradictions, and that really, combined with the breakdown between my ex-partner and the manager, really leads you to scratch your head, ask questions, and say, wow, was there something more at play here? We always talked about together this point that we always made. You wouldn't put your daughter or your son that's in college, in a rickety car with no oil, very little gas, bald tires, and send them from L.A. to Arizona, going back and forth every weekend to college, say, and all of a sudden, 7-8 weeks later, there's a car accident because the tires blow or the engine seizes up and catches on fire, and then all of a sudden you're shocked that something happened. Well, that was very much similar to what was the air around Rick's plane and the travel schedule and all of that. It was very, it's published in articles that there was concern about the plane. The plane had issues, and it was a very why such a rigorous schedule on a plane that was documented that had problems. Bandmates' wives, were not happy about them traveling on it. There was even an incident at one point where some other celebrities were going to accompany him on a trip, and they said, I'm not getting in that plane. He was originally going to take it to the first farm aid, and the plane broke, and he had to fly commercial. So this is it's an ongoing theme that I just think people were not aware of. Rick's plane was actually Jerry Lee Lewis's old plane, and the title never got transferred correctly, so it was never out of his name. Although I have the bill of sales and all of those copies. So Rick was definitely purchasing the plane, and I think it was just anticipated that things were going to get better. There was going to be this big change after the first of the year, and Rick was really going to take the reins back and fire the management and really take control of what he was doing with my ex-partner and really get his comeback cemented. in the new year of 1986. And so, yeah, those details of what was happening behind the scenes and really what the public doesn't know is, I really would have liked to put that in print, but there's legal issues as to why it's not.
Well, I think it's fascinating to me. I forgot about the Jerry Lee Lewis plane. It's just, when you think of celebrities, the last thing you think of is that they don't get to control their own money, that they can't decide where they go, that, there's other people pulling the strings for them. And this thought of escape and how he was going to leave. But, as a woman, I've had several women who are, I don't even know how I'm making this connotation or if it's going to work or not, but let me go down this rabbit hole a little bit because I had a thought. But, I have had several friends who have been in abusive relationships, and I have had to help them plot and strategically figure out step by step their escape route and how they were going to extricate themselves from the situation safely. And it seems to me like, Rick was in this situation and just felt like he could just, sign a piece of paper taking back power of attorney and leave with no consequences because he didn't have the perspective, the 50,000-foot view of all of the moving pieces on the board. And I think, as a celebrity and, for people who are interested in producing movies as well, you have to have that 50,000-foot view because when you're literally in I need to do this right now and get this project done and I need another $10,000, I'll just throw that at $10,000 and you don't see there's another 15 of those in front of you. You've got to have that higher up view, right? And I think that there's definitely something. And, if it was sabotage, if it was in fact, murder, there's no statute of limitations on murder, but finding that detail, finding that evidence is going to be very difficult. So it'll likely end up staying, potential conspiracy theory in conversation. But there are some lessons here when it comes to starting over, right? How do you cleanly close off one piece of what you were doing and honor and respect and sever those ties with the people you were doing it with before you move on to your next one? And it's almost like a relationship, right? Don't cheat on your husband or your wife. The divorce is going to be way messier. way messier. You end that one first, close that all off, sign all the documents, and then go find a new person. Not that listen to me when I say that, but I think there's their life.
I think there's a matter of urgency that is always there that people forego those types of things. I mean, exactly what you said is what we certainly should have done as well, and what Rick should have done certainly. And I think he was trying to do it. I think he was prepared for a legal bout, if you will, about that. You had mentioned the 50,000-foot view, and I think that's right. That's exactly being able to look beyond what's right in front of you to not just potentially what can happen, but just knowing that something else will happen that you're going to have to deal with, and just being aware of it and being ready for it when it happens, and not a derailing event or factor. I think that's what people just don't have and don't, and certainly something that I've learned. I mean, just going through this process and my process, I think I've done, more planning on the sort of aspect of all the what ifs rather than, the best thing that can happen is that I have some success with this book and the story gets out and everybody likes it. I prepared probably 5-10% for that success, for that portion. I've spent, a lot of other time worried about and preparing for contingencies that are unforeseen, but you have to be ready for them. And I think that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned through the process earlier. And it's an interesting sort of I guess visual analogy that I always go to. I always think of, we all know the movie The Perfect Storm with the Gloucester fisherman that got killed and all that. And there's that scene at the end when it's just they're being pounded, and you see that glimmer, the break in the clouds from the storm, and the sun comes through, and you almost think that the boat's going to make it. We all know the story, right? But we see that glimmer of clouds, and you got that hope, and then all of a sudden the clouds close again. And I think that's what really happened to Rick. And I think that he probably felt at those New Year's shows and that last part of December in '85, that he really kind of saw the clouds open a little bit and felt that there was an opening for him. And unfortunately, those clouds closed up that New Year's night. But that's just, if Rick would have had that ability to see a little bit into the future and have some foresight to be able to say, geez, what is my worst case scenario getting into this relationship? Maybe he would have done things differently. You don't know. Obviously, it was certainly a different time, in the early to mid '80s. I think as recent and as fresh as we like to think the '80s are. I mean, geez, look at, even 5-6 years ago, we look at pictures of ourselves from 10 years ago and we think, geez, that was so long ago, and what were we thinking? And so we always think that now is like the most socially aware we are, the most prepared we are. We're so on top of everything. And I think that's just a misnomer. I think that people just don't have the right perspective to look forward, and they really can look at these examples, what happened to Rick, what happened to a lot of other people in that situation, and you can really learn from the mistakes that people made and just the lack of planning that people did. So being a little bit more cautious going into these relationships and transactions and all that is really a very big lesson that we can all learn and take away from the details that are in this book.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We've been talking with Jason Fox, author of Ricky Nelson Uncovered, How I Learned the Truth About His Final Days. It is available on Amazon in Kindle and in paperback. I highly recommend you get this book. And thank you so much, Jason, for joining us today.
Thank you, Adrienne. It was great.